Hello, everybody. My name is Professor Gary Lundquist. I teach music and sound recording at the University of Bridgeport and Stevens Institute of Technology. And I'm guest lecturing for MSCD 544, Music in Secondary Schools. And I'm titling this presentation Music Technology for Music Educators. We'll just be scratching the surface of certain topics, certain technologies that you may come across in secondary schools, K through 12, and tips on how to achieve the best quality sound, utilize that technology to best suit your needs and the needs of the school without getting too technical. Some topics we'll cover today: classroom and lesson recording. So we're going to talk about different techniques in recording for not only ensembles in the classroom, but lessons one-on-one as a private instructor, having the students record themselves or recording your lessons, as well as setting up a music technology classroom, as this is becoming more and more the norm in secondary schools. I don't personally teach in a K through 12 setting. However, I have facilitated different classrooms for younger ages in the music technology realm. We're also going to look at iOS recording and optimizing your Chromebook for recording. And last but not least, we're going to look at different PAs, pop-up PAs that you may be required to assemble in certain outdoor events. I remember when I was in high school playing in the jazz band, we'd sometimes play outdoors, and the music teacher would be responsible for setting up a PA for at least talk back and announcements versus the auditorium PA. In regards to that, we're going to kind of briefly look at mixers and different types of mixers you might see at a school, secondary school, K through 12, what to know about the mixers, what you should know and shouldn't have to touch if they're properly set up. So let's dive right into recording. There's a lot of different options for recording. And the first thing we're going to start is the software. What software are you going to use, whether you're facilitating a music technology classroom versus just simple audio recording? There's going to be certain things to look at. First, is it going to be Mac, PC, or cross-platform? And I could share a lot with my experiences, especially through the pandemic. This is really important. When we got sent home because of COVID, facilitating lessons on a specific software, we had to come up with something that all students had access to. There are great programs that are Mac only. There are great programs that are PC. Some work on both. So that's going to be your first question. Does it have to be cross-platform? Or are you setting up a music technology lab and with all Macs or all PCs? In that case, it wouldn't necessarily matter. Next, we're going to look at multi-channel recording. Some software restricts you to recording only one track at a time. Other softwares allow you to record anywhere from 4 channels at once, 2 channels at once, all the way up to 128 channels at once, for example. So what is your need for multi-channel recording? If you have the need at all. Again, it's always good to think of these things in a scalable model. You may not need many channels recorded at once right now, but where would you see yourself in the future? The next would be, what kind of signal processing does it have? You're going to want to check for the capability of EQing, compressing, adding different reverbs or delays. And then how surgical or precise do these need to be for your situation? Next would be MIDI capabilities. And this is really important, especially for music production, especially modern day. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And with MIDI capabilities, that allows you to input control signals from usually a MIDI keyboard and very easily and fluidly edit that performance as well as the sounds. So you could create a lush sounding string ensemble with a keyboard very quickly change it to a piano sound, for example. You could also play drums right into the computer, again, from your MIDI keyboard. So that would be really important in, say, a music production lab. Less important if you're recording an ensemble or lessons. Does it have a video engine? This may or may not be needed. If you're filming performances and you need to sync up the audio track with the video, becomes more pertinent. But there are also ways around that. Integrated loops, samples, and virtual instruments. So loops are pre-recorded audio. A lot of softwares come with these built in, or you could buy them aftermarket. The workflow in the different software facilitates a different level of inspiration and fluidness working within the software. If you're changing the tempo, certain software has different algorithms to expand or shrink the loop. And again, this is going to be more pertinent to a music tech lab or if you're teaching music production. Same with samples and virtual instruments. Virtual instruments goes back to whether or not it has MIDI capabilities. And those virtual instruments is what you'd be playing on your MIDI keyboard. Lastly, plugins. Again, that goes back to signal processing, things like EQ, reverb, etc. And last but not least, you're going to want to take in consideration the cost. Everybody has a budget, and the cost for different software can fluctuate from nothing to thousands of dollars. So that's one thing you're going to want to keep in mind when you're figuring out what kind of system works best for you or your school situation. So this software that we do most of our recording and editing in are called DAWs, or DAW, stands for Digital Audio Workstation. This is a handful of popular DAWs that are offered for free that offer some restrictions, but a lot of capabilities. Audacity is a very popular one that's cross-platform. GarageBand is Mac only, but has very extensive libraries of different sounds and loops and great MIDI capabilities, a lot of virtual instruments. Pro Tools First is a scaled-down version of Pro Tools, which is an industry standard. However, with Pro Tools First, you're limited to 3 cloud-based projects, and you can't open them up in the full version of Pro Tools. So it is quite a bit more limited than the full version of Pro Tools. Cubase LE has been around for a long time, and it offers a lot of great features. Cakewalk by BandLab. We're going to discuss BandLab a little bit further in the lecture when we talk about Chromebook recording. But Cakewalk is a PC-only software that's a little bit more full-featured than BandLab, and it's free. PreSonus Studio One Prime. Again, this is a free version of a very full-featured DAW, PreSonus Studio One. It comes with a good amount of features right out of the box. It can get pretty surgical, and it does have some virtual instruments and loops that's available free. Ableton Live Lite 9. I'm going to talk about that along with FL Studio Free. These two are, again, free versions, scaled down versions of the professional software. However, these two becoming more and more popular in especially hip hop and electronic music production. And they're great softwares, but their workflow tends to gravitate more towards a sampler that you would use in electronic music and hip hop productions. They work great in that situation. I wouldn't really recommend them for traditional recording and mixing. So here's some full-featured professional DAWs. Ableton Live and FL Studio. There's a little asterisk next to them because of the workflow around it. Again, they're great DAWs. A lot of professional musicians and producers use them, but they're focused more on hip-hop and dance music production workflow. You can do similar things, however, once you start getting deep into it, the audio editing and mixing strays more from the fluidity of other DAWs. Apple Logic Pro Mac only, but great full featured DAW. Step up from GarageBand. GarageBand is Logic Pro's younger brother, but it has a ton and ton right out of the box. It's about $199, and quite frankly, it's worth some of the features that it comes with out of the box, where in other DAWs you'd have to pay for things like vocal tuning, drum programming, all these sounds. It comes with, it's very much worth it. Steinberg Cubase, again, another full featured DAW that's been around for a long time. PreSonus Studio One, great. It's kind of the in-between of Logic and Pro Tools. So it comes with some good MIDI editing capabilities, loops right out of the box, a little bit geared more towards the audio editing. Reaper is a free DAW. It's open source. You can pay a donation if you want to download it. Because it's open source, it's changing a lot. It's very, very customizable because of that. So it tends to have, in my opinion, a lot of features that kind of get in the way of the workflow. But it is a full-featured DAW that is free. And lastly, Avid Pro Tools, again, the industry standard. Me personally, my favorite DAWs to work in are Logic Pro and Pro Tools. Pro Tools is great for audio editing and mixing. Logic Pro is great for MIDI. Pro Tools can get a little convoluted. It's a little bit less intuitive than some other software, especially if you're starting out. But again, it's something that's going to keep evolving, and any music program should be incorporating Pro Tools in some way. That's what we teach at University of Bridgeport. So after you figure out your software, you're going to want to think of what kind of microphone do you want or need. And also, since we're going to be looking at recording as well as pop-up PAs and kind of sort of a live sound environment in auditoriums and high schools, you're going to need to know the different types of microphones that are available. I've seen a lot at high schools, and why you would use certain microphones over others. So we could break down types of microphones into three broader categories: dynamic microphones, condenser microphones, and ribbon microphones. Ribbon microphones tend to be a little bit more fragile and tend to work best in specific scenarios. I've never seen them at a high school or an auditorium before. So you don't really need to worry about ribbon microphones. Dynamic microphones and condensers are going to typically be your most common types of microphone. Your dynamic microphone, if this looks very familiar, kind of a handheld stage microphone. They tend to be very durable, very robust, and they could handle very high sound pressure level. Condenser microphones tend to be more sensitive, especially in the higher frequencies. So we use them a lot in recording and trying to capture a full frequency response. The thing to know about these is condenser microphones require an external power source, and you're going to see either on your mixer in the auditorium or your interface, your preamp, switch or button that says plus 48 volt phantom power. This sends power down the microphone line and charges a capsule within the microphone that allows this microphone to function. If it's not receiving phantom power, it's not going to work. Where dynamic microphones, on the other hand, are passive and they don't need this extra power supply because they work through a system of electromagnetic induction. Personally, in my experience, going through high school and seeing auditoriums, you're going to use these dynamic microphones for vocals or singers or speakers most of the time. They have much better rejection for feedback. Condenser microphones you might be using more for recording. I haven't seen many high schools that you're miking a drum set or individually miking instruments, so I can only speak from my experience. Podium microphones are sometimes condenser microphones, so if you're at the PA and the podium speaker, you can't hear the podium speaker, the microphone's not working, it might be worth it to check to see if they're sending 48 volt phantom power down that channel. Also, sometimes choir mics that are installed, suspended above the stage are sometimes condenser microphones. So here's a very basic setup for recording. In this situation, we'd be using a microphone or an instrument line. That goes into this box right here in the middle called our audio interface. That takes our analog signal from a microphone or, again, an instrument line and digitizes it so it could go into the computer, record it into our software, and it comes back out so we can monitor it through headphones. So this is the kind of setup, again, if you're recording your lessons, recording yourself, or even we have these at University of Bridgeport in our music production labs. Very simple, cost-effective way to record one or two sources at a time. When recording more sources, they have other models. Different companies have other models, and I could send you a list where that allows you to plug in multiple microphones at one time, where this only has a mic input and an instrument input, so you could have up to 2 channels at one time on this particular model. The audio interface really acts as an all-in-one package to record and play back audio. You can plug in microphones or instruments and allows you to record multiple channels at once, multiple tracks at once. For example, of a singer-songwriter, you could plug in your guitar, have a guitar track, and sing into a microphone, and allow yourself the ability to manipulate each channel independently. So you do this by, you're going to have an input gain. When you're playing, you're going to set the input gain so it's not clipping or distorting. You could hear it back, or there's usually a little LED light that flashes. When it flashes red, you want to turn down your input gain. That's the amount of signal going into the interface. They'll usually have a switch for 48 volt phantom power if you need it for, again, only condenser mics. You can see on this Focusrite Scarlett 18i8, we have 2 buttons for phantom power. Each button will power 2 preamps respectively. And this is an example of an interface that would allow you to plug in 4 microphones and record all 4 individual microphones at once into the computer. Again, the function of this audio interface is to convert an analog signal, say from a microphone, or the analog outputs of a keyboard, or plug your guitar straight into the interface, convert it to a digital signal that could be processed by the computer and spit back out so we could listen to it. One thing to look for with interfaces is you're going to need drivers of some sort. A driver is a piece of software you download, install on your computer, that allows the computer to communicate to this interface. That is an external box or an external sound card, you might hear people call it. There's 2 sort of versions of drivers we could break it down to. One would be a proprietary driver, meaning that company that made the interface designed and wrote this special program, this special driver that interface needs to communicate to specifically. So you're going to find that usually either comes with the interface itself, or you could find it on the company's website. Next type of driver would be class compliant. Class compliant is this sort of protocol that different manufacturers came up with to allow the interface to talk to the original computer settings and work off of that, essentially. So class compliant drivers are going to work usually on all Macs. If you're running it off of a Windows computer, you're going to still have to download a driver called ASIO for All, and that allows class compliant interfaces to communicate with Windows computers. So class compliant is great for Mac. You don't need to download anything extra. If you have a class compliant interface on a Windows computer, you're going to have to download and install ASIO for All. Another very simple setup for recording would be your USB microphone. This is going to be great for recording your own rehearsals, practice sessions. It's more for personal use. Podcasting, they're pretty popular with podcasting. And in short, this is a microphone and interface built into one. So that microphone itself does its conversion. You don't need extra microphone cables. It just plugs in USB right into your computer. You might have to still download drivers if it's not class compliant. And these are usually condenser microphones. Even though you don't need to send it 48-volt phantom power, it's getting that power through the USB connection. It's usually going to have a knob on the front of it where you could set your gain and LED clip indicator. Again, so if that LED light starts flashing red as you're playing into it, it means that your signal is going to be distorted. It's going to be overloaded. So you want to turn that gain knob down just a bit. And again, in this situation, that's really all you need. You plug in the microphone via USB into your computer, and it's an all-in-one microphone recording interface. The next setup we'll discuss has to do more with these MIDI production stations for a music technology classroom or individual production. It's a part of the music industry. It's my personal opinion. It's a great educational aspect too. MIDI, and especially USB MIDI devices, is such a powerful tool to get creativity going within students and classrooms, and it's becoming more and more of the norm even in public school settings. In this situation, we have a USB MIDI controller, like the one seen pictured here. It plugs USB into your computer, and you can just plug in headphones or speakers straight to your computer and hear it that way. You could also use these in conjunction with an audio interface, again, like we have at University of Bridgeport. USB audio interface for recording audio, and each station also has a USB keyboard for inputting MIDI data. This situation can be very simple, like the diagram you saw on the previous slide. Just 3 components: headphones, computer, and MIDI keyboard. Or it could be scaled up. You could implement different audio interfaces. You could implement speakers, etc. You could also implement multiple controllers for different functions. And again, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. That transmits computer data, not audio. So you're essentially punching in instructions for the computer to then play back. Works much like a player piano. If you've ever seen a player piano, it's a scroll of paper with punch outs that then triggers the piano to then play specific notes. Very similar to that, where you're inputting instructions to the computer to then at playback specific notes in a specific range with a specific sound. And one thing that we have with MIDI that player pianos didn't have the capability of reproducing is velocity, or how hard or soft you hit that instrument. So we could get really, really lifelike sounds in a very small and cost-effective setup. Another benefit to this, because we're just sending computer information, we could do everything through your headphones. You don't necessarily have to incorporate acoustic instruments. You could have multiple students in a classroom at the same time, all working on their projects, and it'll be pretty much silent with the exception of, hammering these MIDI instrument keys. But if all the students are wearing headphones, it's going to be pretty silent, so you could work on multiple projects at once in a single classroom. And you have a greater range of sounds and ability to manipulate these sounds. And, if I'm a saxophone player and I have a saxophone, I only know how to play saxophone, I'm a little bit limited with the sounds I can get. Where if I have a MIDI keyboard in front of me, I could play saxophone, strings, synthesizers, emulate voices. I could emulate really a whole orchestra, and there were really no limits in the sounds I could create. Or so next, let's get into different cables and connectors. These are going to be some common cables and connectors. First, we have USB. There's going to be a lot of different types of USB. The most common for audio interfaces and MIDI controllers are going to be this USB B type connector. The same thing you'll see on printers. And this will be on the opposite end of your standard USB A connector on your computer. SPDIF or RCA. These are older audio connections. RCA would have one independent. You can see on this side, red and white. Independent left and right. This is still seen very commonly, plugging in an external source or a phone or a computer into a mixer. The SPDIF, you could transmit a stereo signal, but it's digital. So we're not going to see the SPDIF side of this very often. You'll probably see the RCA in pairs going into a mixer. XLR, we have the XLR male connector here, female here. And this is your standard microphone connection. This is where you're going to plug in, unless it's a USB microphone. 90% of microphones are going to use this XLR connection. BNC we could skip. We won't need a lot unless your theater auditorium's using wireless transmitters. You might see this BNC connection on the antenna side. TS and TRS, these are going to be two types of 1/4-inch connectors. 1/4-inch are bigger, kind of the size of guitar plugs. TS is always going to be a mono signal. TRS can be a stereo signal, like the larger headphone jacks. Your interfaces are going to have probably a TRS connection for your headphones, or it could be a mono, what we call balanced signal, which operates very similarly to an XLR. Most common is going to be your stereo headphone connection. Traditional MIDI connectors are going to be 5-pin. Most of the time nowadays you're going to see everything going through USB. Your mini 1/8 inch is going to be, again, your headphone or a small microphone that you have connected to your headphone. Those are going to be common connectors on cables you'll see. Most common, I'd say, USB-B if you're working in a lab situation using a lot of MIDI controllers or interfaces. XLR are always going to be very common. TS and TRS, you're going to need to have those handy. I'd say an RCA to stereo 1/8 inch. So you could plug in a phone or a computer into a mixer. Very easily misplaced, so make sure you have a couple of those and know where they are. Because when you need one, you need one. Here's your common connectors. Here's your standard XLR. Here's the size of a TRS cable. TRS cables can also transmit audio and power to powered speakers. We'll talk about that more in kind of the pop-up PA segment. Some other miscellaneous things you'll see or need in recording or performance: microphone stands, super important. Good quality microphone stands if you have the budget for them. Some of the cheaper ones just simply fall over, or the microphone starts drooping, and so it's worth it to get good quality stands that are going to last a while. The cheaper ones also break very quickly. Microphone clips, a pop filter. A pop filter is a screen that goes in front of a microphone, usually with recording, to avoid blasts of air. So that'll be more if you're recording a lot of things, recording vocals. As well as always good to have different audio adapters on hand for special situations. Like I mentioned, the RCA to stereo 1/8 inch. A lot of the older mixers that are still going to be in the schools are going to have this RCA input. And the easiest way to get, say, a laptop or a cell phone into that mixer for whatever playback music is probably going to be your RCA to stereo 1/8 inch connector. Now that we have the basics of recording, the different equipment we would use in different scenarios, we could go into discuss simple setups for ensemble recording. So they'll require 2 microphone inputs in your interface. The latter is going to require 3. Really quick, we could listen to an example of a small ensemble being recorded by just these 2 microphones. Simple stereo ambient recording. And you'll be able to hear how good of a sound you can capture, and you can capture really good quality recordings with very minimal mics. And
hey guys, Run here from Rode, and today we're in Sydney at the Australian Hall recording a beautiful string quartet with the M5 match pair of half-inch cardioid condenser mics, and we'll also be giving you a quick sneak preview at the new Rode stereo bar, which will be available in early 2014. So let's go and check out the setup. Alright, so today we are recording the Accent Strings Quartet from Sydney, and what we're doing is using the XY coincident stereo technique to pick up the quartet today. So the idea behind the XY technique is that you're getting sound reaching both capsules at the same time so that you're not going to have any phase issues and mono compatibility. Now the reason that we've placed the mics up at this height is so that we've got a nice balance of both the room sound and the direct sound from the instruments. And we've also slightly rearranged the quartet from where they would normally set up, and we've got the cello kind of more towards the center so that we don't have a bass heavy right hand side, and we've got the viola player kind of turning a little bit more than what he would normally do, just so that we've got the soundboard facing the microphones and we've got nice direct sound from all instruments at the same time. And what we also want to do is kind of try to make sure that there's a nice balance by keeping the instruments an equal distance from the center point of the microphones.
so you could hear just with those 2 microphones, you have the ability to capture very clean, very pristine, and well-balanced audio. So there's a couple different techniques we could discuss in order to do so. The first one being XY technique. For reasons of phase coherency, which is a whole discussion in itself, we're going to cross the microphones at 90 degrees. The right microphone is going to capture the left side of the ensemble. The right microphone is going to capture the left side. So you're going to flip them or pan them opposite directions when you have them inside your DAW. If anybody goes to jam band concerts or concerts where you have tapers, this is going to be one of the techniques. You're going to see people sticking microphones in the air at the sound booth to capture recording. So you can set this up really anywhere in an auditorium or rehearsal space and be able to capture a nice stereo image of the ensemble. These are usually going to be condenser microphones, whether it's small diaphragm condensers like you see here or large diaphragms set up on separate stands. They're usually going to be condensers, again, because condenser microphones allow you to capture a lot of detail, especially in the high end. Another example of stereo miking technique, the distance markings on this picture, because it really is going to depend on how you're miking it in the source. These are going to be usually, again, small diaphragm condenser microphones pointed straight at the source. So instead of crossing the microphones at 90 degrees, you're going to space them apart, and point them directly at the source. So the right microphone's capturing the right side of the recording, the left microphone is capturing that left side of the recording. And again, this is another example of tapers at a concert. If you go to any jam band shows and you see people sticking microphones in the air, 90% of the time you're going to see either the XY or space pair in this situation. Decatry was derived by Decca Records in the 1950s in order to record and capture larger ensembles. This is the only example we'll look at that you need more than 2 microphones. You'll need 3 microphones for this. Again, they're going to be condenser microphones to capture a lot of the detail and transient response. You're going to have 2 off to the side, similar to a space pair, and then 1 in front. This allows the 2 side microphones to capture the left and right of the ensemble or orchestra, the middle microphone to capture the center of the orchestra. And you would pan those accordingly once they're in your DAW. The middle center microphone is going to stay straight up the center, left and right, pan left and right accordingly. So those are 3 simple yet very effective ways to record an ensemble.